All right. Well, I believe Mallory has just let everybody in, so I want to say welcome and thank you for joining us. So today, the ULI Young Leaders, we're excited to host our third installment of the 15 for 15 series. Our program today and the next one we're going to do, which is going to be on Friday, March 12th. So please register and mark your calendars now. These two programs are going to focus on the cannabis industry and what real estate and other industry professionals need to know as this segment continues to change. My name is Sean Warmstein, and I'm excited for our guest to join us today, Tara Tedrow. Tara is a shareholder and chair of the Cannabis and Controlled Substances Group for Lowndes. She's an adjunct professor on cannabis law at the University of Florida Levin College of Law, and she chairs the state's Hemp Advisory Committee and serves on the Florida Ag Department's Industry Hemp Council. So I guess that kind of makes her an expert on all this, and needless to say, we're very lucky to have one of the state's top minds and experts on cannabis with us today. One quick reminder before we jump in is we will do an open Q&A at the end if anyone does have any questions. So please submit those via the chat, because if we have questions in chat, we'll do Q&A, but otherwise we'll wrap it up. So please enter them there. So with that, let me jump in and welcome Tara. How are you, Tara?
I am good, Sean. I appreciate you saying that I'm a legal expert in cannabis, because sometimes I get introduced as just the state's and I'm like, it's technically on the legal side of things.
No, absolutely. So real quick, could you kind of in 2 minutes or less, could you just give us a quick cannabis market overview?
Sure. So in case everybody doesn't know, it is still federally legal. I think a lot of folks assumed with the change of administration that would presumably be friendlier to cannabis, that we would have some radical changes from day one. Sean, that hasn't happened. So on a federal level, marijuana still remains a Schedule I drug, which means that it is illegal to possess or transport or sell cannabis. Now, a majority of the states in the United States have passed legalization of medical and or adult use recreational marijuana legislation. So it's interesting because there still exists that dichotomy and a direct conflict between federal and state law in a lot of instances. In Florida specifically, we have a program that has legalized and on a constitutional level, medical marijuana for use by qualified patients. In the state of Florida, we have over 491,000 patients that have been registered with the Department of Health Office of Medical Marijuana Use. We have over 2,600 licensed physicians who write orders in the state of Florida. Over 315 dispensaries have been opened statewide as of last Friday. As of last Friday, too, 178 million milligrams of marijuana were sold in a 5-day period. About 4.6 million milligrams of low THC marijuana were also sold in that period. And about 56,000 ounces for smokable marijuana were also sold last week alone. So if you're really interested in just how much marijuana gets consumed every 5 days in Florida, all that information is available online every Friday. So I know those kind of statistics. I'm not sure if everybody else does, but it is a robust industry to say the least. Most people project that Florida will be one of the largest markets in the country on a medical side, but certainly if we go recreational, that those changes would be huge for the state of Florida. So that's where we stand today.
Perfect. So I think that gives us a good jumping off point, if you will. So on the federal level, you have the Safe Banking Act. And then, on Florida right now, there's a case before the Supreme Court, the Flora Grown case. It really could have a big impact on the industry moving forward, since they both have, I think, or for anyone who's in that industry, there are two things that people really need to know about and understand a little bit more. Could you tell us about each of those and kind of, what their pending passage or the ruling in the case of Flora Grown will mean?
Sure. So just on a federal level, there's been two big pieces of legislation that the industry was really excited about. That's the Safe Banking Act and the MORE Act. The MORE Act would have removed marijuana as a Schedule I drug, so it would have legalized cannabis. That one had some traction in the House, unsurprisingly, not in the Senate previously, which is the same with the Safe Banking Act. The Safe Banking Act has had a lot of bipartisan support because, candidly, it just makes sense. When you have a majority of states that allow for cannabis to be sold either under adult use or under medical programs, but yet those companies acting in compliance with state law are unable to get access to banking and financial services, from Wells Fargo, Bank of America, those major financial institutions, it creates a huge problem from a public safety standpoint. We don't want businesses operating in all cash, right? It's been looked at as the Wild West in places like Colorado and the inception of their industries, because there was a lot of crime around dispensaries because criminals knew there was going to be, cash on hand at all of these dispensaries because it was the only way that they could transact business. And in places like Colorado, they largely still are transacting business predominantly in cash. Now, there are banking options. So a lot of people say it's an all cash business. That's not correct. I represent banks and actually help write their banking policies for taking on cannabis clients and hemp clients as well. Even though hemp is federally legal, shockingly enough, some banks don't want to take hemp clients, even though it's legal on a state and federal level. So there is an adversity to getting into the industry for financial institutions, which is why the Safe Banking Act would remove that type of liability just for transacting business with legal cannabis companies. It would be a great way to help financial institutions to be able to service the industry. Obviously, they're not required to do so. A lot of banks probably wouldn't want to take on the industry anyway because they see there being a lot of risks associated with those businesses. But on a federal level, those two pieces of legislation are the ones that have been introduced, haven't had a lot of traction. Of course, there could be some changes where we would have either a legalization on a federal level, which would totally remove criminal penalties for cannabis. There could also be some descheduling, rescheduling of cannabis. So when we talk about legalization or changes on a federal level, there's a few iterations of what that could look like. We figure that this administration and the change with the Senate might be a friendlier atmosphere probably to the cannabis industry moving forward. In Florida, we do have some adult use legislation that has been proposed. Given the DeSantis administration's position on cannabis, even though he has been very friendly in terms of opening up, dropping some lawsuits, allowing smokable and things like that, I don't think we're going to get adult use legalization short of it coming on a ballot initiative. We didn't get a ballot initiative to make it this last election because there's some. I think someone might want to mute their computer to being able to have some changes in the state of Florida. So unfortunately, I don't think we're going to see any changes for adult use legalization, but there are two pieces of legislation that have been proposed for those 21 and up to be able to possess a certain amount of ounces of cannabis to smoke for recreational uses.
Gotcha. So like you said, I think we could be on a precipice. We may, or, where it actually ends up going, that remains to be seen. So as we talk
about Flora Grown, which I meant
to.
Yeah. Yes. So the Flora Grown case, nobody is probably watching this except for those in the cannabis industry, but it's actually a case before the Florida Supreme Court. And the Flora Grown case challenges the constitutionality of the current vertically integrated system we have in Florida. So I didn't mention this in the intro because I think it makes sense to talk about it here, but the way that we have licensure in the state of Florida for medical marijuana treatment centers, so they're called MMTCs, there are 22 licensed companies. Those 22 companies under Florida statutory law have to grow, process, transport, and dispense via patient delivery at home or brick and mortar retail dispensing locations. They have to do all of those functions. They cannot have any third party handle any aspect of that for them, which is why we have a vertically integrated license structure right now. So some states have horizontally integrated licenses, meaning I could just get a license to retail, I could get a license to cultivate, or I could get a license to process. So there's been a Supreme Court case called Flora Grown, which had 2 rounds of oral arguments, which is rather unusual. The last one was in the fall. And so the Supreme Court's going to render a decision as to whether the current vertically integrated structure is unconstitutional. What that means for the industry is it could blow everything out of the water. One, I think we can guarantee we're going to get some more litigation because those 22 licensed companies are probably not going to be happy if the Supreme Court comes in and says your licenses, which are valued at 25 to $50 million, are probably going to lose a lot of their value if they are no longer a controlled tight market where you have the entire supply chain under one licensure. And it could also open up more licenses to be issued if the Supreme Court said, you're right, vertical integration is unconstitutional. Go back and rewrite the rules, and the legislature would have to implement new legislation to deal with whatever the outcome is. But one thing I can guarantee is we're going to see a lot of litigation. 5 licenses were issued in 2015 to companies. We had 17 licenses issued as a result of litigation in the state of Florida. Yeah. Lawyers have done well for the last 5-6 years.
That's for sure. And I think that brings me to my next question is, so maybe we'll see horizontal integration, maybe we won't, maybe we'll see federal legislation, maybe we won't. But there is, I think, a common misconception that, it's a gold rush in the cannabis industry. So could you briefly kind of talk about what maybe are some of those, common misnomers, if you will, and what really, market entrants should be focused on a little bit when it comes to getting in the industry?
Yeah, there's been a lot of folks over the years who were like, I'm going to quit my day job and I'm going to just be a cannabis broker, or I just want to go, do acquisitions of sites just for cannabis cultivation in Florida. And I'm like, listen, the market's just not there. With 22 companies, we can presume there's going to be 22 sites they're probably going to grow and process, given the amount of capital and operating expenses required to even operate in the state of Florida and to open up one of these facilities, because they all are state of the art, fully indoor cultivation, fully indoor processing. And so maybe some of these companies are expanding, but we're not talking about dozens of sites for cultivation and processing under the current licensing structure. And we have 315 dispensaries statewide amongst 22 companies. That's not a huge amount either when you consider the size of the state and how many markets that these companies want to be in. So I always tell people, don't quit your day job to get into the cannabis industry. Some lawyers haven't quit their day job of what they've practiced, otherwise. I mean, I'm still a land use lawyer, handle a lot of land use cases statewide, but a big chunk of my practice has been devoted to cannabis. So there are a lot of misconceptions about the market opportunities that exist. I think you'll probably hear a lot of those too in the hemp industry right now. So people are saying hemp is the next green rush. It is a legal crop agriculturally that can be grown nationwide, has a huge market for its monetization of secondary byproducts like CBD and Delta 8, if nobody's heard of Delta 8 THC. I mean, there's a lot of products that are derived from hemp that are gaining huge popularity. They're being sold in, Bed Bath & Beyond and Publix and all these other major national retailers now, and you can see them all over online. So maybe there's a green rush in hemp, but in cannabis, it's really so selective, those who are going to have market opportunity.
Yeah. And actually, we have a question which we'll get to in our Q&A on that. So we'll dive into that in 1 second. But one final thing I just wanted to ask you, and you speak kind of as a land, your day job's a land use attorney. So, anytime you're bringing a new project to a community or to a government entity for approval, the ability to speak on behalf of that project, because ultimately what you're trying to do is you're trying to ask for change, with any new development. The ability to present on that is important, and I think often overlooked, and especially I think people are resistant to cannabis. So could you speak to a little bit more about how you approach presenting a new cannabis project?
So I approach it the same way I handle all of my land use clients. There is not a huge amount of excitement when I come in and I'm like, listen, I am going to bring a super Walmart next to your residential neighborhood, or I'm literally putting, gas station and convenience in your backyard. So it's education and it's just persuasion in a lot of respects, right? You have to go before local governments, and I'm not there to ask them to smoke marijuana, right? I don't need you to become a user. I don't need you to become an industry advocate. I just want you to understand what the industry is, what the laws are around cannabis in the state of Florida, how strict the protocols of operation and security are on dispensing facilities, and to understand those legal limitations that they can impose. And then, hey, these are your ordinances. Act within the confines of the law. I'm asking you to approve something not because you like it, but because the law says you should support it. Or if it's a new ordinance that we're trying to get them to enact to allow for dispensaries in their jurisdiction, that's something that, again, it's just an education piece. I never go in trying to beat people over the head saying, like, you should believe these people need cannabis. It really is the same tactics you have to use with any land use case on just having people understand what your pitch is, give them some persuasive reasons as to why they should agree with you, and then bring it home with what the law says they should apply in that consideration.
Perfect. Well, I know you rushed through a lot quickly, Tara, but really appreciate it. And we did have a couple questions. So the first question is from Jim Fried, and he specifically wanted you to speak a little bit about the new hemp law and kind of what it means going forward, as he's starting a vertically integrated hemp company. So he wanted to hear a little bit more about that.
Hi, Jim. How are you? Great industry advocate Jim is. He knows a lot about this industry too, so he probably could have done the presentation himself. The hemp industry under our Commissioner of Agriculture, Nikki Fried, she has been phenomenal, a huge advocate, not only for the cannabis industry, but also specifically in bringing forward the hemp industry in the state of Florida. So we had a change federally in 2018, and that bill allowed for states to enact their own hemp programs. Florida was very quick to implement our program to come in line with federal regulations so that we would be able to have more opportunities for farmers throughout the state, and then opportunities for retailers, manufacturers, transporters, and processors. So we have a very strong program in place to see a huge hemp industry in the state of Florida. So very exciting. No vertical integration requirements on hemp. You can get involved in any aspect of that business, whether it's retailing, manufacturing, processing, transporting, or cultivating. So a lot of opportunities there if folks are interested. And you can cultivate hemp indoors or outdoors. So the restrictions that you see on the cannabis industry just don't exist for hemp here in Florida.
Perfect. Our next question is from Darwin Kelly, and it's asking, so if you want to learn more about this, what are the best publications to recommend or places to kind of stay up to date on news?
Everything I put on my LinkedIn, of course.
I like that. I like that plug.
Shameless plug opportunity. There's a lot of news sites out there, some that just focus specifically on cannabis. If you shoot me an email, I'm happy to give you some of the links that I follow and publications we look at. I also just set Google alerts for all of the different types of industry alerts that I like to hear. So if you set a Google alert for Florida and cannabis or hemp and cannabis, you will get a lot coming into your inbox every day.
Perfect. And Mallory, if you could pop Tara's email in the chat, that would be awesome. Thank you. A question from Chris Collins, and I know he was talking about something that happened recently in the city of Miami here, but he wanted to ask, are municipalities required to develop their own laws for cannabis sales in their respective cities?
So that's a great question. So under statutory law in Florida, local governments do not have any jurisdiction over cultivation and processing facilities from a zoning perspective, which is kind of wild if you think about it. I mean, no zoning regulations apply. So I can build my processing facility with 0-foot setbacks, 100 stories high, and 1 parking spot if I wanted to, under the way the statutes are written. Now, my clients aren't that abusive of local government, so they don't do that. But we don't have to go through plan approval on a zoning perspective. We just have to comply with Florida Building Code and Florida Fire Safety Code for all cultivation and processing facilities. When it comes to dispensaries, local governments do have jurisdiction to determine their regulations as to whether they want to ban dispensaries, or if they allow them, they have to treat them like a pharmacy for zoning purposes. Meaning, if you allow pharmacies in any commercial zoning district, then if you're going to allow dispensaries, they also are allowed anywhere in those commercial zoning districts that pharmacies would be allowed. Local governments can craft their own regulations to say we want pharmacies, and by virtue of that, dispensaries to be set back from schools or from each other. So they can come up with stricter regulations, but again, it has to apply the same between the two.
Gotcha. All right. Our next question, I'm going to almost read this like it's a Twitter call out just because their name isn't associated. So rather it's just the email. But Krupp Nareen, who's I'm guessing a attorney at Berger Singerman, based on the address, has said, having worked with the state banking regulator regarding the feds and the Safe Banking Act. So President Obama had Operation Choke Point for financial regulators, which were strongly encouraged to provide heightened scrutiny of financial institutions in the form of more frequent, examinations. The Trump administration acted similarly, and so it's kind of created a chilling effect. Where do you see the trend with the Biden administration going?
I think it'll change, right? I think that there's been comments that they are more open to looking at ways that we can expand those types of financial services. So I think we're going to have a friendlier administration. Do I think Biden has come out and said, I want full legalization and I support that entirely? No. Was the VP behind the MORE Act, which would have removed cannabis as a Schedule I drug? Yes. But I think we're going to have a friendlier attitude. I think we'll probably have access to financial services expanded more quickly than we may see something like full decriminalization or full legalization on a federal level. Because again, from a bipartisan perspective, it really does just make sense to have those offerings.
Gotcha. Well, with that, I think we've gone through all of our Q&A. We certainly thank everyone who submitted a question, and definitely want to say thank you to Tara for joining us today and always being a great resource on this subject.
Happy to do it. Happy to come back anytime.
Awesome. All right. Well, we will definitely take you up on that. And like I mentioned at the beginning, everyone, our next 15 for 15 session will be on March 12th. So register. And if you have any ideas of topics you'd like to see covered at all, please just feel free to reach out to Mallory, myself, Dom, or Erin. So with that, thank you everybody so much for spending a couple minutes with us today.
Thanks so much.